بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين عليه من ربه أفضل الصلاة والتسليم. أما بعد. Now we all have heard the hadith, the statement of Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman describing himself and his relationship with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in which he said, كان الناس يسألون رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الخير وكنت أسأله عن الشر مخافة أن يدركني. That people used to ask the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about good, but I used to ask him about the evil out of fear that the evil would reach me. And the statement of the poet, عرفت الشر لا للشر لكني تواقيه ومن لم يعرف الخير من الشر يقع فيه. That I familiarize myself with evil, not for the sake of evil, but to protect myself from it. Whoever does not know good from evil will soon fall into the evil. Likewise, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He said, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. And as such does Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala set forth His ayat in great detail. Does Allah elaborate upon and give great detail to His proofs and His evidences and His religion, His laws, and so on and so forth. وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلَ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. And so the path of the criminals can be made bare and clear. And so the religion of Islam is a religion that outlines for us, as was stated by Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Al-Fawaid, the Sabil al-Mu'mineen ma'rifatan ijmaliyya wa ma'rifatan tafsiriyya. And the path of the mu'mineen, the path of the believers in broad and in detail. And the Sabil al-Mujrimeen, and the path of the criminals in broad and in detail. And it gives us valuable advices about the asbab and the dara'i', the means and the avenues that lead people to progressively increase in evil, and how we as believers can protect ourselves from evil. And so today's talk is a talk along those lines about the Islamic guidelines on shielding the young from sexual predators, from a taharrus al-jinsi, and from sexual predators, or from those who behave evilly towards children in a sexual nature. And there are a number of advices in this regard that we want to begin with. The first advice is a reminder that the shaitan is working adamantly to kill the momentum of the Muslim community, and to stop growth and to stop development, and to destabilize families and to stigmatize the da'wah and so on and so forth. And as your presence here is evidence of the fact that you have heard to some degree what transpired to date and why we are having this talk. And the bigger part of the reason of why we are dealing with it the way that we are dealing with it is because, as the scholars they say, at-tajarib bi'sa al-mu'allim, that experience can sometimes be the worst teacher. In the past, where we tried to deal with things by contacting the local authorities and letting people press charges against the offender, and that sort of route, whether people press charges or not, and the information wasn't divulged to the community at large, and the community found out about it anyways, because that is what unfortunately many of us as Americans do. It's a very American way to be, to thrive upon controversy and to look for that which is provocative and that sort of thing. And we seek Allah's refuge from being like those people that were described by Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Madarij al-Salikin, when he says some people, they are like dogs and pigs, that when they are presented with what is tayyib, what is wholesome and pure and goodly, that it doesn't motivate them. You don't see them involved. You don't see people with the same zeal and the same type of energy when it comes to learning their religion, when it comes to being with their brothers, when it comes to brotherhood and sisterhood and that sort of thing. You don't see them active. You don't see them in the masjid attending the lessons. You don't see them in the masjid involved, that sort of thing. And I hope that nobody here is like that. But when khubuth, khaba'ith are presented to them, then you find them very active. You find them very active. And when filth, when fecal matter and dung and decomposed meat and so on and so forth is available, and you find them like hyenas and you find them like pigs. And everybody has a say-so. And we remind the people not in a condescending way that we are your teachers. And we know what you don't know. We know what you know and we know what you don't know. And Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has blessed us and tested us to have some experience in what we are doing. And He has blessed us to be your teachers. And it is a shame that a person which is the case with many people who are the most active, talking about such things on social media, the majority of whom are always women. May Allah help the woman. And may Allah help the good sisters to advise their sisters who are acting out of pocket and talking out of turn about such affairs that are very sensitive things. It's a shame when a person hasn't studied even Al-Qa'idah to Nuraniyah, can't even read the Quran without understanding its words, can't even read the words of the Mus'haf. When a person can't even enter into the Medina Book 1 class, when a person, if you ask him about the abjadiyat, the ABCs of Tahara and Salat and the Arkan and Shurut and Wajibat of the Salat, wa haluma jarra, etc., etc., then they say, ha la adri sami'tu an-nas yaquluna shay'an faqultu. I don't really know. I just saw people and heard people doing this or saying that, and so that's what I heard and did and said. When it comes to these sorts of issues, they act like they are mutakhassisin fil bab, like they are the experts, and like they are the people of experience. We remind them of the statement of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, إِذَا جَاءَهُمْ أَمْرٌ مِنَ الْأَمْنِ وَالْخَوْفِ أَضَاعُوا بِهِ. That when a matter comes to the people touching safety or fear, that people spread it amongst themselves. وَلَوْ رَدُّوهُ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ. Had they only referred it to the messenger. وَإِلَى أُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْهُمْ. And those charged with responsibility from amongst them. لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنْبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُمْ. And the proper investigators would have looked at the situation and come to the right conclusion. وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ. Had it not been for the grace and the mercy of Allah upon you, لَتَبَعْتُمُ الشَّيْطَانَ إِلَى قَلِيلًا. You'd have all followed the shaitan except for very few. So when it comes to issues like this, there are those who refer things back to the proper people. People who know what they're talking about, who can practice their best discretion, who have bounced these things off of the scholars on multiple occasions as they have come up in the course of the last 20 years plus, to know what to do in these situations and how to handle these sorts of situations. Then people start to say things like your kids aren't safe in the masjid. I ask you, billahi alaykum, isn't that what the verse is talking about? People who are causing a ru'b, causing fear in the Muslim community by talking out of turn. There are those who handle things in the right way. There are those who follow the shaitan. And there is no third category that is mentioned in the verse. And if the children aren't safe in the masjid, and the masjid is the place of nur, the place of guidance and light, the place of goodness. If we were to say, like the statement of some people, halak an-nas, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the person who says, man qala halak an-nas fahuwa ahlakahum, or ahlakuhum, that the one who says people are destroyed, then he is the one who has destroyed them, or he is the most destroyed of them. And a person, when they take an isolated incident, and they blow it out of proportion, and they act like that is a commonplace norm, we say to some of the same people, aren't your children in daycare while you go to work? Aren't your children go to public school? Aren't your children left in the custody of your non-Muslim family for hours on end throughout the day? Are you the same people that allow your children to play with all and sundry, mallahu bihi alim, with every child in the neighborhood, now looking at the company that your children keep? Are you the same ones that allow your children to be for prolonged periods of time on a day-to-day basis in a state of khalwa, in a state of seclusion and privacy, being alone with other youth that live in today's society who have been sexualized from the time that they were old enough to watch TV, who leave your children to watch the television for hours on end? That a person would move their lips to make the suggestion that the masjid is not the safest place for their child. And we say, as Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala said about that man who said that the jinn don't exist, and he said that was one of them speaking with his tongue. You have let the shaitan take control of your mouth and your tongue, and use it as a jund in his junood, use it as one of his troops in his army, and as a weapon against this da'wah, mubarakah. What happens with situations like this? Oftentimes, that there are haters. There are people sometimes amongst us and oftentimes outside of us who look for the dung and who look for the filth and who look for something that they can use as a side against a da'wah. We say, a da'wah to hadihi da'wah to man. This da'wah of ours is whose da'wah? Whose da'wah is it? The da'wah of Allah and the da'wah of the messengers of Allah alayhim as-salatu was-salam. وَهَذِهِ شَنْشَنَةٌ نَعْرِفُهَا مِنْ أَخْزَمٍ. As the Arabs, they say, this is a shanshana, this is some rabble-rousing and some noise-making that we heard a long time ago. And people have been saying these sorts of things a long time ago. So to begin with, I want to read a couple of statements in this regard, the doubts of the kuffar and the people of innovation, about this da'wah mubarakah, using isolated incidents and the sins of the Muslims and sins of people who are viewed to be people of repute even amongst the Muslim community, to slander the da'wah of the prophets and the messengers. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he said in his book Minhaj al-Sunnah, what is that book about, Minhaj al-Sunnah? Refutation of who? Of the Rafidah. The refutation of the Shia. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, يحتاج طائفة من أهل الكتاب من اليهود والنصارى على القدح في دين المسلمين بما يجدون في بعضه من الفواحش. That there are some people from Ahlul Kitab, from the Jews and the Christians, who use some of the acts of sexual immorality that are found amongst the Muslims as an evidence against their religion. وَمَا يَجِدُونَهُ مِنَ الظُّلْمِ, and that which they find of oppression amongst the Muslims, or al-kadhib, or shirk, or lying, or dishonesty, or a lack of integrity, or a shirk, amongst some people who say that they are Muslims. فَإِذَا قُوبِلُوا عَلَى وَجْهِ الْإِنصَافِ وَجَدُوا الْفَوَاحِشَ وَالظُّلْمَ وَالْكَذِبَ وَالشِّرْكَ فِيهِمْ أَضْعَافَ مَا يَجِدُونَهُ فِي الْمُنْتَسِبِينَ إِلَى دِينِ الْإِسْلَامِ. He said, but if they were to compare with objectiveness and fairness between the Muslims and other than the Muslims, they will find, if they were fair, that the sexual immorality and oppression and dishonesty and lying and shirk that exists amongst them, amongst those who are making the accusations, أضعاف ما يجدونه في المنتسبين إلى دين الإسلام, are many times multiplied beyond that which can be found amongst those who call themselves Muslims, he says. وَإِذَا بُيِّنَ لَهُمْ حَقِيقَةُ الْإِسْلَامِ, and once the reality of Islam is clarified to such people, تَبَيَّنَ أَنَّهُ لَيْسَ فِيهِ شَيْءٌ مِّن تِلْكَ الْفَوَاحِشِ وَالظُّلْمِ وَالْكَذِبِ وَالشِّرْكِ. And you will find that Islam has nothing of that. It doesn't contain anything of an encouragement for sexual perversion or immorality, anything of oppression, anything of dishonesty, anything of lying, anything of polytheism, or anything of the sort. فَإِنَّهُ مَا مِن مِلَّةٍ إِلَّا وَقَدْ دَخَلَ فِي بَعْضِ أَهْلِهَا نَوْعٌ مِنَ الشَّرِّ. There is not a single religion or religious community except that there has entered amongst some of its people some degree of every degree of evil. لكن الشر الذي دخل في غير المسلمين أكثر مما دخل في المسلمين. However, the evil that is present and that has entered upon other than the Muslims, upon the non-Muslims amongst the kuffar, is more prevalent than what is found amongst the Muslims. والخير الذي يوجد في المسلمين أكثر مما يوجد في غيرهم. This is a قاعدة شرعية مضطردة. This is a religious principle that is applied across the board open-endedly. Whatever you find of bad, whatever you find of immorality, whatever you find of things that are troubling amongst the Muslims, then without a doubt, it is to be found amongst other than the Muslims even more so. Even more so. And whatever you find of good amongst other than the Muslims, amongst the kuffar, then you will find that good exists to a much larger degree, to the highest degree amongst the Muslims. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَكَذَلِكَ أَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ. He said the same can be said about the people of Sunnah amongst all of the people of Islam. In comparison to all the rest of the people of Islam, the people of Sunnah, in comparison to all the groups of innovation. If you look at the Jama'at Da'wiyya and Mu'asara, and the modern day groups of Da'wah, like the Jama'atul Tabligh, and like the Ikhwan al-Muslimin and other than them, then what is known that transpires amongst them, what is known to have occurred amongst them, what is known historically to have occurred amongst the Sufiya in the past and the modern day Sufis, and all that have branched out from them, of sexual immorality and of these sorts of things, is ad'af. It is many times beyond what could ever be found amongst the people of Sunnah. I remember dealing with a situation like this around 15 years ago. And I asked one of our most seasoned elders, one of our most knowledgeable elders, who had been the imam for around 20 years in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the United States of America. I said, certainly you must have dealt with stuff like this many times before. He says, Wallahi, this is the first time I've ever seen anything of the sort. These things, they don't happen a lot. It's not for a person to blow such a occasion out of proportion and act like this is more commonplace than it is. However, it is not a dhahira, but it is dhahira. It's not something that is a phenomenon that is occurring widespread amongst our communities, but it is something that is in existence that needs to be addressed. And so we are addressing it. Likewise, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says in his refutation of the Christians when they proposed the exact same doubt, almost exactly what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn al-Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said, as we just heard. And he said, وَإِنَّ الذُّنُوبَ وَالْمَعَاسِي أَمْرٌ مُشْتَرَكٌ بَيْنَ الْأُمَمِ. He says, and it must be said that sins and disobedience is a matter that is shared between the nations. There is no one who is spared from such trials and tribulations amongst themselves. However, we, ayyuhal muslimun, we are Muslims, we have the guidance of how to deal with things in the best fashion, of how to analyze claims, how to take the da'awat of people, and the claims of people, the da'awi of the people, and analyze them, and to solicit a confession, to gather evidence, so on and so forth. These things are referred back to the people who know how to deal with them, the sensitivities of them. and the intricacies of them, and they're not for the people at large to talk about. Lest that a person should be accused falsely, lest that a person's honor should be slandered, so on and so forth. So we remind at this moment, which is a teachable moment, that we are to treat sensitive matters with their due diligence and to take our time and to have ta'anni with them. From the things that we want to talk about, or that we need to talk about, as relates to being on alert against the threat of sexual predators, is that the dynamics of a situation like this typically, and there are entire research papers that have been written in the Muslim world, doctoral theses even, that have been written about at-taharrush al-jinsi and the prevalence of it in the Muslim world and outside of the Muslim world, and going through the statistics and so on and so forth of how many out of every 10 children at some point in their life go through some instance where they are inappropriately dealt with by an adult or by another child or by a family member or by a stranger in a sexual fashion. And the dynamics are as follows. The first thing that usually happens in a situation like this is that there's somebody who is mawthuqun bih min qibal al-walid or min qibal al-aba, somebody who is trusted, oftentimes naively, by the child in question, the young person, the young child, the older child in question, young or old, male or female, or by their parents. And that this child is alone with them in private. This is the first part of the dynamic that needs to be addressed. Misplaced trust, and what comes as an extension of that, who is allowed to be alone with our children, and who do we allow our children to be alone with? And the Islamic guidelines for this. The second thing is the fact that oftentimes, probably more often is the case than not, that people who are like this, who prey upon children, that this is a matter of a demand for them. It is an addiction for them. It is an addiction for them. As a man was about to be punished by Umar radiallahu anhu wa ardahu, as is well known and mentioned throughout the books of fiqh and qada and so on and so forth, that talk about these issues. A man was about to be punished by Umar. He was exposed for his sin, and the head was about to be exacted against him. And he said, am I going to be punished or put to death for one crime that I committed, for doing something just once? He said, kadhabt. He said, you are a liar. Allah will not have exposed you just the first time. Allah will not have exposed you just the first time. So it is normally a pattern of behavior. So not to get ahead of ourselves, but something that must be said is that if you know of suspicions about a person that are built upon something other than conjecture, accusations that have been made against a person, then that needs to be brought to the attention of the leadership of the masjid, of the imams of the masajid, and of the administrations of the masajid, so they can keep their eyes on those people. Something interrelated is that if you know that somebody has a substance abuse problem. Earlier today I was on the website for the Ministry of Justice in Saudi Arabia looking over the court cases and how these cases are dealt with in the court system over there, and reviewing some information. And in almost every single case, if not every single case, where the details were laid out of somebody who committed an act of sexual perversion against a child or against a relative or something of the sort, that was the equivalent of a crime that they were imprisoned for and lashed for and that sort of thing, then almost in every situation there was a matter of drug addiction or substance abuse. As comes in the statement of Uthman, that he said, Al-Khamru Mada, what did he call Khamr? Ummul Khaba'ith. Khamr is the Ummul Khaba'ith. It is the mother of all filth. A man, on account of drinking khamr, يَقَعُ عَلَى أُمِّهِ وَابْنَتِهِ, may have intimate relations with his own mother, his auntie, or his daughter, or his sister. Allah's refuge is sought. A person who has a substance abuse problem, people who have substance abuse problems, oftentimes keep the company of each other and conceal the secrets of each other. Oftentimes, they are dealing with chronic pain, and their substance abuse is something that they are struggling with because they are dealing with chronic pain, and so they become addicted to painkillers, which escalate to fentanyl or heroin or something of the sort. And in such a condition where a person is intoxicated, inebriated, a person is beyond their self, and their judgment is even more impaired, the shaitan, and not to scapegoat the shaitan can get the best of them. And the shaitan can lead them to things that in their normal frame of mind that they will not have fallen into. And so it should be brought to the attention, not to expose a person, min bab al-nasiha, so that they can get the proper help. Because they are marudah, because they are sick people. We once asked one of our scholars about people in our communities that we know, because they were in the penal system with brothers that we are very familiar with. They were incarcerated with people that we are familiar with. And we know people are locked up. People know what their charges were. People know who was in jail for messing with children, who was in jail for being with a minor or an underage person or something of the sort. And so that will be divulged to the imam of the masjid and the administrations of the masjid or the masajid. And we ask the scholars, when we know this about people, how do we deal with those people? There are two advices that stand out. One advice was not to give them any responsibility in the masjid at all. Don't even let them clean the toilets, they said. Don't even let them clean the toilets. Give them no responsibility in the masjid. However, this goes to the second advice, do not ban them from the masjid. Do not ban them from the masjid because they are sick people. And the masjid is a mustashfa. But this goes back to the discretion of the leadership of the masjid. Meaning somebody in the past, in the far past. Not a new situation that has just happened. And where the presence of a person, and he is mu'udhi by in and of itself, it's a nuisance and it's a menace in and of itself that a person be in the masjid while this is known about them. Or they have admitted to such things. But somebody in the far past, because the masjid is a mustashfa. The masjid is a hospital. The masjid is a hospital where people come to get better. So going back to the three dynamics, the first we said is that there is somebody who is trusted, who is in seclusion, who is alone with the child. It's the first thing. The second thing we said was, help me out. Trusted naively. It's not an isolated situation. It's usually a pattern of behavior. So if you know somebody has a pattern of behavior, if you know that there are accusations, if you know that a family split up, that the mother separated from the father because of these sorts of accusations, then you're not saying unequivocally, you're not saying with certainty that such and such is the case, that a person has done this, that, or the third. You are bringing it to the attention of people who need to know that this is something that needs to be kept an eye on. You need to be aware about this situation. Because why? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Sultanu waliyyu liman la waliya lah." Sultan is the wali, the person without a wali. The ruler is the guardian of the one without a ruler. The ulama of Islam, the kibar ahlul ilm, Ghudayan, Fawzan, Luhaydan, we've asked them all and we've been told by them all. Kibar ahlul ilm have said that matters touching disputes, marriage, divorce, custody, so on and so forth, they refer back to the knowledgeable people in the community, to the imam and to those that are entrusted by the imam. to the imam and the teachers and those that are entrusted by them, and those that are trusted by them. And so, if somebody يقدم نفسه للزواج, puts their self forward for marriage, says, look, I'm single, and I'm lonely, and I'm jonesing, and I heard that there are some single, lonely sisters that are jonesing, and we want to get married, and perhaps you can help me find somebody to marry. And this person, despite their history, despite their past, this was never brought up about them. It was never investigated. Nobody ever got down to the bottom of it about their situation. And then they marry somebody else, and now they're somebody's stepfather. And the cycle repeats itself. And the cycle repeats itself. And if only we could say that we were saying this theoretically. If only we could say that we were saying this theoretically. And this sort of thing hasn't happened time and time again. The third thing is a sirriya, is that both parties keep it a secret. That both parties keep it a secret. Neither party, the victim, out of shame and perhaps sometimes out of fear, and the victimizer, the predator, out of shame and out of fear for what may happen to him or her, they keep it as a secret between themselves. They keep it as a secret between themselves. So these are the three elements of this sort of situation. So we want to look at this in some more detail. The first of these three things is a person who was trusted being in privacy. Sometimes it is a family member. And unfortunately, what is known historically, any researchers in the Muslim world and non-Muslim world, they have said that almost 2/3 of situations are like this, they come from a family member. A family member, and they are done inside of the home. And they are done inside of the home. Sometimes those who prey upon the young may be another young person who is perverted, who has perverse sexual leanings and so on and so forth. And this is the second most common cause, or the second most common source of this sort of thing. So a person must analyze and look at those that they allow their children to befriend, and the amount of time that they let their children spend around other children. And how well do you know the friends of your children? And on what basis do your children choose their friends? Because we know in Islam that there are shurut for sadaqah, that there are prerequisites and conditions for friendship. But when a person is a child, they meet somebody, and 5 minutes later they're going to their parent and they're saying, this is my best friend. This is my best friend. On what basis has your child chose their friend? Is it because they go to school together? Is it because they are family? Is it because they are cousins? Is it because they are neighbors? Because they live in the same neighborhood? Based upon what? Do you allow those children or your children to be around those children and those children to be around your children? What are the conditions for friendship in Islam? Who can rattle some of them off quickly? To make somebody your friend in Islam. I don't think our children are traveling with their friends. That's a way that you get to know somebody. That's from the ways of al-ma'rifah, to actually know somebody well. A condition for friendship. Religion. They have to be a Muslim. And that's the most important condition. There are a number of stipulations that come with that. What is meant by a Muslim? Just any Muslim? Just a person who says that they're a Muslim? They have to be a Muslim who is? They have to be غير bid'i. They have to be a Sunni, not a bid'i. They have to be a Salafi, a Sunni. Right? They have to be what? What else? Well, that's outside of religion, but yes, they have to be sane. Which is important, especially in the hood. Right? There's some crazy little kids in the hood. And everywhere else for that matter. Huh? Knowing their parents. Knowing their parents is a good indicator, because you can, الثمرة الطيبة تَصْدُرُ عَنْ أُصُولٍ طَيِّبَةٍ, as was stated by some of the Salaf, and that good fruits come from good roots. Good fruits come from good roots. But that's a test of a person's religion. What else? They're not a fasiq. That they have good character. They have good character. Good character is usually mentioned outside of religion in and of itself, right? Outside of religiosity. But that is definitely a condition. Somebody said sane. They had to be a person with common sense, the scholars say. They had to be aqil, غير safi, not a foolish person. A foolish person is a person who doesn't look at the consequences of behaviors. Isn't that what we're talking about here? Now, if this is the case with a young person befriending a young person, then how many question marks should be raised when you see an older person befriending a young person? That's weird in and of itself. That an old person, not respecting and mentoring and trying to help out a young person, but being chummy and childlike with a young person, and being their friend and singling out a young person or some young people as their friends, as we'll come to see inshallah ta'ala. That's, as this Generation Z, right? They say that's sus, right? That's sus, that's suspect. So they had to be a person of religion. They had to be a person who will remind them of the hereafter, to get close to Allah, to stop and pray when it's time to pray, all those sorts of things. They had to be a person who is upright in a general way and not an openly sinful, shameless person. So what about a young person who says there's nothing wrong with homosexuality? That statement, there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, that's on the tongues of many of the youth. That statement is a statement of kufr, istihlal. To say there's nothing wrong with it, but you say that, it must not be forbidden. To say there's nothing wrong, there's no iqab for it, that's a dangerous statement. It's a statement of kufr in and of itself. And there are many horrible ideologies that are widespread amongst the youth, that many of the Muslim youth pick up in Muslim schools. So sometimes the person who's mawthuq bihi is somebody who is kibar fi sin, somebody who is older in age. Somebody who is older in age, and we'll come to see the statements of the Salaf about this. There's a tremendous book written by Al-Imam Al-Hafiz Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dunya rahimahullah ta'ala called Dhammul Malahi, the dispraise of musical instruments. The dispraise of musical instruments, and he has a lengthy section in that book that is quoted over and over and over and over again in the books of akhlaq and aqidah, or the books of akhlaq and aqidah, like Talbis Iblis, and in the books of fiqh and the madhahib, the statements of the Salaf about not gazing at and staring at little boys. Not gazing and staring at little boys. Grown men not looking at prepubescent boys. Boys before the age of puberty, or at the age of puberty, where boys don't have facial hair yet and their faces are kind of feminine looking and that sort of thing. And how the Salaf al-Salihin hadaru ashad al-tahdhir, warned with the most severe type of warning over and over and over again, ala marr duhur, generation after generation, against this and against what is ashad min, and what is worse than another, which is al-khalwa bil-murdan, which is being in private, being alone with little boys, being alone with little boys, prepubescent boys. And this is something that is fi ghayat al-ahamiyah when we talk about this issue. Sometimes those that they are alone with, and they are alone with in public, sometimes and in person, sometimes those that they are alone with and talking to and put their confidence in, and who are subjecting them to some sexual immorality, and he is by way of the internet. And we advise every parent in our communities to put on all of the necessary precautions on your internet. There's something that's called the Circle. It's a device you could buy and plug into your router. And you can block all social media. You can block Facebook or whatever. I almost said MySpace. I would have shown my age. Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want to block. All pornography. Everything that you don't want your children to have access to, you could block whole categories or entire websites. You could block, and you need to be very careful even of games that children play that have chat features in the games, where children can talk to each other. And on the other side of that keyboard, there is a fat dude in his 40s somewhere in Utah, drinking beer, talking about their 6-year-old girl. Be very, very careful. You leave your children alone with the internet, leave your children alone to play video games, so on and so forth. Your children are not safe in today's world from all of these threats. If we would just want to be naive and act like these things don't exist, then when we ourselves are plagued with these matters and our children fall victim to some of these things, we will have no one but ourselves to blame. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-mu'minu ghirrun kareem, wal-fajiru khibbun la'im. The mu'min is ghirrun kareem. The nature of the believer is that he is ghirrun kareem. Ghir, ay la tajariba lah. He is inexperienced, he is savage, meaning he is dupable, he's naive, and he's kind. Meaning because he's kind, as scholars explain, he has good thoughts about people. He doesn't want to have bad thoughts about people. And so he is kareem, he is kind, but he is naive. وَالْفَاجِرُ خِبٌّ لَئِيمٌ. And the wicked person, they are khibbun la'im. They are despicable and they are clever. They are despicable and they are clever. And so the believer has to strike a balance between having as a asl good thoughts about the Muslims as a general principle, treating people with civility and dignity, and not having bad thoughts about people without justification. You don't deal with people in the general world like that, so why would you deal with the Muslims like that? On principle. On principle. A person will go insane if they just have bad thoughts about everybody. So on principle, a person, they think well of other people, unless there is justification to think poorly about them. So the believer is like that. He is dupable and he is kind. And the fajr, he is khibbun la'im. Ibn Abdul Barr, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the most important books that collect the statements of the Salaf al-Salihin and matters of character, the book Bahjatul Majalis. He mentions right after this hadith, which is authentic, the statement of the Prophet ﷺ in Kitab al-Raqaq, in Sahih al-Bukhari, لا يلدغ المؤمن من جحر واحد مرتين. The believer is never stung twice out of the same hole. Which is similar to the hadith, the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, السعيد من وعظ بغيره. The person who is sa'id, who is successful, is the one وعظ بغيره, who is admonished by seeing what happens to others. They take lesson. Like the statement of Umar radiallahu anhu when he said, لست الخب ولا الخب يخدعني. I am not a khib, I am not a trickster, and no trickster is going to fool me. And he said, احترز من الناس واحترزوا من الناس بسوء الظن. Protect yourself from people by having su'u al-dhan, by having healthy ill suspicions. Meaning by not putting your trust where it hasn't been earned. This was mentioned by Ibn Muflih, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his most famous book, Al-Adab al-Shar'iyah, where he explained these ahadith in light of each other, and how a person must be balanced between having good thoughts about the Muslims in concept, in a broad generic way, but in a detailed way. And you wouldn't just marry off your daughter, would you, to some dude you just met in the masjid. You go home and you say, Karimati, oh my young precious daughter, I just met some dude in the masjid. I know you're single, and you're eating up the food in my house and so on and so forth. You need to get up out of here. And he seems like a nice guy. You wouldn't marry your daughter off to that person. Why would you entrust your children to that person? Why would you leave your children to people who are dubious characters or people that you don't know the reality of, that sort of thing? So we must be vigilant. We must be very vigilant. So this sense of trust that people have with other people, as we mentioned before, is oftentimes misplaced and naive. And who we allow our children to stay the night in the homes of and that sort of thing, and who we allow our children to go out in public with, to go to the malls with and that sort of thing. And how many times have we heard of things that we hate to repeat? Because our scholars, they say that sometimes when you talk about sins and disobedience to a large degree, it desensitizes people and it makes people feel like these things are normal and commonplace. And there are so many people doing them that this is commonplace with the Muslims, and Allah is forgiving and merciful and all that sort of thing. So the girls, they hook up and they go to the shopping mall together. And they go in the front door and they take off their hijabs. And they go and meet the boys from the high school that they go to. And the parents are like, what is going on? I've tried my best. I don't understand why we're wrong. I've given you everything. You've given them everything of the dunya. You've given them everything of the dunya. Have you really given them everything? Have you really tried your best? That's a whack excuse. That's weak. For a parent to say, I've tried my best, I don't understand where my daughter went wrong, or my son went wrong, why they fell into immorality, so on and so forth. Hey, that's a statement that is nonsense. It's a statement that is nonsense. A person needs to analyze those that they allow. It's okay for your kids to be mad at you. You're not there to be the friends of your children. You don't have to be militant. We're not talking about whoop on your kids and beat on your kids, so on and so forth. But look at their telephones, who they call, who they text with, so on and so forth. Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, he said it's mandatory to spy upon their telephones and to look at what they're doing. That's mandatory for you as a parent. They say in the social sciences and what they call the helping arts, right? The helping professions in America. The expert class of people who don't know the first thing about anything about helping any of themselves, let alone anybody else. They say a statement that's true, however. They say that child neglect is more harmful to children than child abuse. Child neglect is more harmful to children than child abuse. So it's neglectful for us not to be mindful of the company that our children keep. It is neglectful and it is naive of us and to not cut off the avenues that lead to destruction. I mentioned a couple of the statements of the Salaf about musahabat al-amrad, about men being in the company of young boys, prepubescent boys or boys at the age of puberty, young boys, and that sort of thing. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, he said, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الرَّجُلِ يَلِحُ النَّظَرِ إِلَى غُلَامٍ أَمْرَدٍ فَاتَّهِمُوهُ. When you see a man constantly looking at a young boy, فَاتَّهِمُوهُ, then hold him suspect. Hold him to be suspect. Likewise, it was stated by Al-Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala in his book At-Tibyan fi Adabi Hamalat al-Quran. He said, فَإِنَّ النَّظَرَ إِلَى الْأَمْرَدِ الْحَسَنِ مِنْ غَيْرِ حَاجَةٍ حَرَامٌ سَوَاءً كَانَ بِشَهْوَةٍ أَوْ بِغَيْرِهَا. He said, looking at, staring at, and gazing at a nice-looking young boy without a need to do so, without a need of looking at him, is haram, it is forbidden. Whether that is done with desire or lust, or without desire or lust. سواء أمن الفتنة سواء أمن الفتنة أو لم يأمنها. Whether or not that person feels as though they are safe from being tempted by looking at the young boys or not. It is forbidden for them without a need to look at the young boys. For men to look at young boys. For men to look at young boys and to gaze at young boys. Whether that is done with desire or not. He says, هذا هو المذهب الصحيح المختار عند العلماء. He said, this is the correct viewpoint, that is the selection of many of the scholars. وقد نص على تحريمه الإمام الشافعي. And Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala explicitly said that it was forbidden. وَمَا لَا يُحْصَى مِنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ. And he had a number of scholars whose numbers cannot be enumerated and counted throughout time have held it to be forbidden. وَدَلِيلُهُ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى. The evidence for that is a statement of Allah exalted be the Most High. قُلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Say to the believers that they are to lower their gazes. Say to the believers that they are to lower their gazes. Allah. Pay attention to this statement of Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala and what comes after the speech of the scholars. Because sometimes the only way to protect ourselves from what is unspeakable is to admit what is unspeakable and the existence of the unspeakable. He says, rahmatullahi alayhi, the evidence for that is the statement of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, قُلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Say to the believers that they are to drop their gazes. That they are to drop their gazes. وَلِأَنَّهُ فِي مَعْنَى الْمَرْأَةِ. And because the young boy, the young man, فِي مَعْنَى الْمَرْأَةِ, and he has the same meaning of the woman in his appearance, and he is like the woman in his appearance. بَلْ رُبَمَا كَانَ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْهُمْ أَحْسَنُ مِنْ كَثِيرٍ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. To the point that many of the young boys and young men may be more attractive in appearance than many women. وَيَتَمَكَّنُ مِنْ أَسْبَابِ الرِّيبَةِ فِيهِ وَيُتَسَهَّلُ مِنْ طُرُقِ الشَّرِّ فِي حَقِّهِ مَا لَا يُتَسَهَّلْ فِي حَقِّ الْمَرْأَةِ. And a person may find themselves able, they may find the opportunity to be in a doubtful situation with a young boy and find it easier to do something from the various ways of evil with them in a way that it is not easy to do with a woman and to be around a woman or to find the company of a woman. فَكَانَ تَحْرِيمُهُ أَوْلَى. And for this reason, the forbiddance of grown men looking at and gazing at and staring at without a need young boys. To the point that even Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala told this to a man about his own nephew, who was very nice looking, who was walking with him. Not to walk with him, he said this, he said, Huwa ibnu ukhti. He's my nephew, he's my sister's son. He's my nephew, he's my sister's son. He said, La yahliku fika nas. He said, don't let people be destroyed because of you, meaning that people don't know that. And people will be destroyed, they'll speak about your integrity, seeing you with this young boy, they must think that something wrong is going on between you and him. The Imams of the Salaf, they warned people. They were afraid for their own selves of the fitna of the shaitan and how the shaitan can play with the minds of people and make the minds of people think what is unspeakable. As came from some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they said to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ that sometimes there occurred to us things that we would rather fall upon our nostrils from the heavens, from the sky to the earth. We would rather fall flat on our faces on our nostrils from the sky than ever uttering with our tongues. Meaning wasawis from the shaitan. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Dhaka mahdul iman. That is purely faith. Meaning that prevents you from acting upon those impulses. And that causes the shaitan to attack you in the first place. The shaitan is trying to do his worst. Ibn al-Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he said the more a person has of strength and energy when it comes to knowledge and worship, the more the shaitan attacks that person to make people go astray through that person. The shaitan is working his most diligently to destroy our communities and to slow down the progress in our communities. And we must be on guard against such things. And the Imams of the Salaf themselves were afraid of this fitna for their own selves, to the point that they said that they would rather be in seclusion with 10 virgin girls, private alone with 10 virgin girls, than being alone with one young man. Because if the shaitan can trick a person and tempt a person into that type of destruction, there is no doubt that that is from the mubiqat. That is from the amal qawm al-lut. from the behavior of the homosexuals. And as some of the Salaf, they said in their statements about this, that this was how the fitna of the people of Lut began. By grown men keeping the company of young men and young boys. Allah's refuge is sought. The Imams of the Salaf warned the people from this, and warned the people from feeling safe when it came to their own inner selves, and the whisperings of the nafs and the whisperings of the shaitan and so on and so forth. And the unspeakable things that may occur in the mind of a person. And if this is how things were in that time, what about the times in which we live? Al-Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, and for this reason, the prohibition of looking at the young boys and being in khalwa, being alone with them, is awla. It is more rightful to be included in this verse to drop your gaze. To drop your gaze. وَأَقَاوِيلُ السَّلَفِ فِي التَّنْفِيرِ مِنْهُمْ أَكْثَرْ مِنْ أَن تُحْصَى. And these statements of the Salaf in keeping people away and telling people to stay away from keeping the company of young boys are more than can be enumerated and counted. Al-Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, likewise, he says about that verse, and say to the believers that they are to drop their gazes عَنَ النَّظْرِ إِلَى الْعَوْرَاتِ, from looking at the awrat, looking at the parts that are mandatory to clothe, and the naked parts of people. مِنَ النَّظْرِ إِلَى الْعَوْرَاتِ, from looking at the naked parts of people, وَإِلَى النِّسَاءِ الْأَجْنَبِيَّاتِ, and looking at women that are foreign to them, that they are not allowed to look at. وَإِلَى الْمُرْدَانِ, and to look at young boys, young men, prepubescent boys at the age of puberty. الَّذِينَ يُخَافُ بِالنَّظْرِ إِلَيْهِمُ الْفِتْنَةِ, those that it is feared from them, al-fitna, by looking at them. Ibn al-Jawzi, in his book in Refuting the Deviant Sects, his book Talbisu Iblis, he mentions 8 categories of people. فِي النَّظْرِ إِلَى الْمُرْدَانِ, from the most extreme of the Sufis, who sought, by way of their immorality, nearness to Allah by sexual perversion. He mentioned 8 categories of people, to the lowest of people, who said that they wanted to keep the company of the youth, to advise them and benefit them and all that sort of thing with the best of intentions. With the best of intentions. But this prolonged type of contact. We're not talking about ad-dirasa. We're not just talking about basic education, that which is la budda min, and that which must happen. That which must happen. And we're talking about being in prolonged contact in a way that is suspect, in a way that is forbidden by the Imams of the Salaf. That there were people who, this was their claim, until the shaitan jarrahum ila al-fahisha, until the shaitan drove these people, despite their best claims, into al-fahisha, into the unspeakable. Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala is a famous fatwa about the Sufiya, about the Sufis. And speaking about the statements of some of the Sufis who said that looking at young boys and staring at young boys is to contemplate over the beauty of the creation of Allah, and it brings you close to Allah. And these sorts of things. In direct contradiction to the statements of the Salaf. Al-Imam Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says in his famous fatwa, he said, وَلَا يَنْبَغِي لِأَهَدٍ أَنْ يَغْتَرَّ بِنَفْسِهِ. He says, not befitting for anybody to be deluded about their own nafs, to have good thoughts about their own nafs when it comes to this janab, when it comes to this matter, when it comes to this issue. For a person to have good thoughts about their own self and to be deluded by their own self. أَنْ يَغْتَرَّ بِنَفْسِهِ أو يثق بما يظن في نفسه من صلابة دينه, or to feel confident about what they imagine and believe about their self of having firmness in their religion. This is unspeakable, and that they would never fall into such a thing. وقوة إيمانه, and thinking that they have strong iman. فإن من خالف حدود الله تعالى والنظر إلى ما منعه الشرع من النظر إليه. And he says this after quoting some of the statements that we already heard from the Salaf, like the statement of Sa'id ibn Musayyib and others. He says, because whoever opposes the boundaries set by Allah violates a boundary set by Allah, and looks at what the religion has forbidden him from looking at, نُزِعَتْ مِنْهُ الْعِصْمَةِ, then Allah's protection will be snatched away and taken away from that person. It will be taken away and stripped away from that person. وَوُكِّلَ إِلَى نَفْسِهِ, and he will be entrusted to his own self. Al-Hasan ibn Dhakwan, he said, لا تجانسوا أولاد الأغنياء فإن لهم صورا كصور النساء وهم أشد فتنة من العذارة ومن العذارة. He said, do not sit with the children of the wealthy, because their appearance is like the appearance of women, and they are a greater temptation for people than young unmarried girls. وقال نجيب السري كان يقال لا يبيت الرجل في بيت مع المرد. النجيب السري, Ibn Abi Dunya and Ibn al-Jawzi in his book Dhamm al-Hawa, and in his book Talbis Iblis, he mentioned Najib al-Sirri. He said that it used to be said in the past that a man is not to stay overnight in a home that has young boys. In a home that has young boys. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَأَمَّا الْخَلْوَةُ بِالْأَمْرَدِ, as for being alone, as for grown men being alone with young boys, فَأَشَدُ مِنَ النَّظْرِ إِلَيْهِ, and this is more severe in prohibition than looking at them. لأنها أفحش وأقرب إلى الشر, because it is more obscene and it is closer to evil. وسواء من خل به منصوب إلى صلاح أو غيره, whether or not the person who is alone with them is thought to be a person of righteousness and rectitude, or somebody who is not righteous. And so there is much that can be said in this matter, and we advise the parents that the stronger the home is, and the more time the children spend at home with their parents, and the more stability there is in the home, and the more there is a presence of the actual mother and father of the child, as opposed to any separation that is commonplace in our communities, and the more there is open communication with the children, and the more children have the confidence to speak to their parents, the more we will protect our children from such things. The more our children have confidence in social skills. And you see children who are introverted, children who are raised in the masjid, but because they have been raised by their fathers around the men and seen how men behave amongst each other, and they know how to interact, and they know how to conduct themselves in a way that is not effeminate. They know how to conduct themselves in a way that is dignified. They know how to conduct themselves in a way that doesn't make them look like a target for others. And we advise the parents to have an open dialogue with their children about these sorts of matters, and to not from the direction of desensitizing children to such things and making them fear the world around them, but making them realize that every place that they are, they must be diligent and they must be on guard and they must be observant of the people around them. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to make us of those يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ, who hear what we hear and follow the best of what we heard. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala أَلَّا يُؤَخِذَنَا بِمَا فَعَلَ سُفَهَاءُ مِنَّا, not to hold us accountable for what the foolish people amongst us may say or do. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to quell the flames of fitna and to quiet the tongues of the people in a state of afiyah without anything bad happening to them, who are talking out of turn, they making fitna and talking about things in a way that they have no business talking about such matters. We ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for al-afu wal-afiyah wal-mu'afat fi dunya wal-akhirah. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.